Welcome to the Boxing Gossip channel. Please hit subscribe if you are new. As always, thanks for tuning in. In a fight that has potentially slipped slightly below the radar, the returning James Degale rematches Caleb Truax this Saturday, the 7th of April in Las Vegas at the Hard Rock Hotel and Casino. Before we get into the breakdown, I'm going to say I've seen certain articles saying that James Degale is pledging that he will retire if he loses the fight again. I'm quoting now from an article I see on BBC Sport. The headline is, "James Degale underestimating me again," says Caleb Truax. It goes on to quote James Degale, "Caleb Truax is not on my level. I'm miles above him. On 7th of April, I'm going to show everyone why and show everyone what I'm all about. As soon as the doctors said that some athletes come back after 6 months from my injury, I was determined to fight in 2017. Everyone can see that I was slow in the ring. I was ashamed of my performance. It was embarrassing, and I'm looking to erase that on 7th of April. For the past 6 weeks, I felt so much better. My jab is sharp again, and everyone will see that when I become a 2-time world champion." So James Degale, as ever, confident, some would say arrogant, in the lead up to the fight against Caleb Truax. As with all boxing rematches, the question on everyone's mind, will it be repeat or will it be revenge? Let me start by saying, reasons to believe James Degale is no longer the kind of fighter who he was at his best. Well, for a start, he's now 32 years old. Having said that, Caleb Truax is 34 years old, so I'm not saying 32 is too old to win in this fight whatsoever. But Degale is now 32 years old, and in a way, you'd have to say he's very much approaching the veteran stage of his career. I know it doesn't feel like that long ago, but James Degale made his professional debut in 2009, February 2009. So, by the time these guys step in the ring, Degale's professional career will be 9 years and 2 months in. James Degale fought George Groves over 12 rounds back in May 2011. So that in itself was 7 years ago now. It makes me feel old. I remember watching that 7 years ago. So, Degale's been in that level of competition now for a very, very, very extended period of time. And that's not the only fight that was a difficult, close fight. That's not the only fight that's gone 12 rounds. Obviously, the Andre Dirrell fight, the Lucian Bute fight, the Porky Medina fight, the Badou Jack fight, the first Caleb Truax fight. And looking back at that, especially if we look at 2015, 2016 and 2017 even, those have been a grueling schedule of fights. A grueling schedule of fights. The Andre Dirrell fight, tough fight. The Bute fight, a real close, tough, rough fight. The Porky Medina fight, an unexpectedly difficult fight. That Badou Jack fight, a war that you could see maybe weakening the career of James Degale. Those are the kind of fights that take time out of your career. And that Caleb Truax fight, I agree Caleb Truax is a lower rated fighter, but Truax put a bit of a beating on him, didn't he? I mean, there were rounds in that were tough rounds. They were hard rounds. They were brutal rounds. They were rounds that were going to be hurting, causing injury, causing damage to James Degale. So it is possible that without knowing it, James Degale has become something of a fighter with many, many, many miles on the clock. Professional now for 9 years, 25 fights, tough fights. And in hindsight, now we've seen him lose so badly to Caleb Truax. Can you go back to Porky Medina? Can you go back to Lucian Bute? And can you say, even in those fights, they were a bit too close for comfort? Maybe the signs of slippage were there. Degale training with Jim McDonnell. Jim McDonnell's a nice guy. He's known as this aggressive fitness taskmaster in the gym. He's known as someone who squeezes every ounce of his fighters. squeezes every ounce out of his fighters. Could all of those training camps, could all of those runs, could all of those brutal sessions have contributed in combination with all of those tough professional fights to mean that at 32 years old, James Degale's body is old. James Degale's body is past it. James Degale's body is not capable of the performances we were seeing in 2014 against Brandon Gonzalez, against Marco Antonio Periban. You know, these are legit questions for me. Legit questions for me. And because of that, it's going to be a long road back, you know, for James Degale. A long road back for James Degale, because he's not going to be getting any younger. The fights are not going to be getting any easier. And there is an increasing selection of wolves hanging around in that 168-pound division. You know, Gilberto Ramirez, top fighter. Jose Uzcategui impressed me against Degale. Jesse Hart, underrated. David Benavidez, you know, a lot of the guys on my podcast really rate him as the, you know, the second coming of Sugar Ray Robinson. Then you got other names. You got other names in that division. Guys who are not going to be easy fights. Jurgen Bremer, Callum Smith, Chris Eubank Jr., George Groves. You know, there's not going to be easy fights for James Degale to win those big bucks. It's possible he'll come again. I mean, you look at George Groves. You know, back in the day, after Groves got cobra'd twice and then he lost to Badu Jack, maybe we were saying similar things about George Groves. Maybe we were saying, you know, maybe George Groves has had too many tough fights. Maybe he's been stopped once or twice. Maybe he's come to the end of his top-level career. But subsequent to that, Groves has put together 7 wins, including, you know, stoppage wins over Jamie Cox, Fedor Chudinov, beating the likes of Martin Murray, obviously schooling Chris Eubank Jr. So George Groves has proved that you can have something of a, you know, career resurgence after a difficult period, after a few tough fights, after a few losses, even after a stoppage loss. But the difference is George Groves is a couple of years younger than James Degale, and despite George Groves taking some very, very difficult losses, you know, Groves has only ever lost at the very, very top level. He's only lost at the elite level. James Degale losing to Caleb Truax, I mean, honestly, not taking nothing away from Caleb Truax, but who amongst us would have considered him a top 20 super middleweight prior to this performance? You know, maybe even broader than that. Maybe you could say he wasn't even top 30. Maybe you could say he wasn't even top 40. I expected James Degale to knock him out. You know, I know James Degale isn't a devastating puncher. I know he's not a sort of Deontay Wilder style knockout artist. But I thought the gap in levels would be so vast between the two guys that it would be a knockout, potentially an early knockout. You know, Caleb Truax, James Degale was 1 to 100 on, and I agreed with those kind of odds in the lead up to the fight. Truax fought a tactically perfect fight. He was fit, he was strong, he built pressure, he didn't let Degale have the space he wanted, but Degale played into his hands. His jab was weak. He didn't capitalise when he was on top. He'd land some good punches and then back off. He was put on his back foot too much by Truax. There's the old Degale moments of being in the corners, being in the ropes. At this stage of his career, perhaps we have to accept those are just Achilles heel type flaws that are always going to be prevalent in James Degale's game. Look, he hasn't ironed them out at 32 years old with several world title defences and an Olympic gold medal. Realistically, we can say it's never going to change at this particular point. So it's tough for James Degale, and make no mistake, unless Degale turns up showing substantial improvements from the first fight, he will lose again, because, you know, Caleb Truax showed that he had the measure of James Degale, and it wasn't a wafer-thin win. You know, it was a win that was competitive but clear. You know, from my seat anyway. So James Degale is going to need to show more. Prediction time. This is actually one of the hardest fights you'll ever see to predict, in my opinion, because I think 99 people out of 100 would agree that Caleb Truax was the worthy winner, and 99 out of 100 would say, in an exact replica of the first fight, Caleb Truax would win again. So we're taking Degale's welfare and Degale's condition on trust. Degale's talking a good game, saying he'll retire if he loses, saying he's feeling miles better, saying he rushed back from an injury. He's talking a good game, he's saying the right things. But the truth is, James Degale always says the right things. Degale has not been a fighter who over the years has been backwards in coming forwards when talking about his own performances and talking about his own strengths in the game. So it'll be very, very, very interesting to see if the Degale who does turn up does have something more, you know, is operating at a much, much higher level than the first fight. On balance, whilst I'm uncomfortable making a prediction, because fundamentally I don't know what condition James Degale's in, but on balance, I'm on YouTube to make videos like this, and I'm on YouTube to make predictions when I need to. So, on the basis of making a prediction, I will say James Degale wins. And the reason I'll say he wins is, despite being poor, and despite Truax being a deserved winner, the fight was still close. Degale still won multiple rounds. You know, it was a fight that was probably a 7-5, 8-4 type of fight. And that was a James Degale who was on impossibly bad form. Caleb Truax, for me, at the age of 34 years old, in a division that I don't see him as instantly suited to, Caleb Truax has not become a world beater overnight. He's not become an elite fighter overnight. For me, not wishing to take anything away from Truax, but that first fight I will remember for how bad Degale was as opposed to how good Truax was. Now, Degale probably has slipped, but the amount of slippage he'd shown in that fight was hard to comprehend. This is a guy who drew with Badou Jack, widely considered an elite fighter last time out. This is a guy who had huge success against Badou Jack last time out. And to see him going from a guy who proved to be at a similar level in drawing with Badou Jack to a guy getting beaten up, because that's what it was, by Caleb Truax. For me, I am going to say there probably were other factors in play, such as the injury, such as the training camp. And I'll give James Degale one last chance on this channel, in terms of predicting him, to right those wrongs. Do I think James Degale's going to come back and be the same James Degale? Do I think I could predict him to beat George Groves or even Chris Eubank Jr.? Not at this stage. But do I think that he can eke out the necessary improvement to beat a 34-year-old Caleb Truax blown up to super middleweight? In all honesty, I do. I do. And despite an appalling look in the first fight, I'm going to go with James Degale. But it's not a confident prediction, and it comes with all sorts of risk factors because, as I say, the biggest risk in this fight is what kind of James Degale shows up, what kind of shape is he in, you know, and those are unknowns. So you're picking it based on trust. Let me know your thoughts. Leave your comments in the section below. Let me know your thoughts on this fight. If you've enjoyed this, please like, please subscribe, hit the thumbs up. We'll be sure to do some post-fight coverage. As always, thanks for tuning in.